Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unbridled Medicine TV. I am your host, Hillary Schneider. So I wanted to talk about today about a archetype I landed in last year called the Wounded Woman archetype. And this was a really big kind of breakthrough for me, and it really helped in terms of supporting my ability to kind of move through my wounded parts, both as having a business and kind of sharing my work in the world and some of the things that we bump up against that. And one of the things that I really believe is really important in this concept of unbridling our medicine, and again, for me, that interpretation is that we're really courageous in creating our offerings and our business in connection to our gifts, that we're allowing it to be felt in the world. And I think one of the things that we have to navigate through is our wounds, right? Those are the places that will hold us back and, keep us, I think, from creating at our full potential. And I think addressing that place is just a really important space that we have to navigate through. And I was on a call with a private client of mine yesterday, and I'm helping her kind of work on, a new face and essence to her work. And she wanted to start off the call really looking at something that she keeps bumping up over and over and over again and wants to move through. And so this sort of teaching around the wounded woman archetype came up. And so I wanted to share that with you today. So where it kind of came from is I had this experience last year where I was working with a mentor, and it wasn't really a good space for me to be in. I invested a lot of money to be in this program, and I just was finding that it wasn't the right support. And this had happened to me before in terms of, signing up with mentors from this place, I think, of fear that I needed to be saved and they were going to be the ones to save me, but it really wasn't a good fit. And their, process of how they held space wasn't really aligned for me. But I went through it anyways. And I think also this concept that, I have to invest like a lot of money in order to get to certain results. And the result of it often did was I actually lost my confidence even more, and it put me right into a lot of debt. And so I was having this moment where I was kind of feeling like, what is this pattern and why am I in this again? Like what happened here? Like I thought that I really was, following an intuition. And this is like a really shitty place to be. And I was feeling ashamed, and I was feeling resentful, and I was feeling afraid. And I was sitting up on a hill, and I was looking at my lead mare, a pony. And all of a sudden I sort of felt this sort of awareness around this sort of wounded woman place. And she actually kind of gave me, or I felt through, kind of watching her, this space of this wounded woman archetype. And so what happened was, and I felt kind of her communicate to me that this is about accessing your power and finding that, identifying those places where you're still carrying that wounded space and identifying that both in you and in other people. And so that sort of became the emergence of this wounded woman archetype. And where it's been super, super helpful is it's really helped me identify the part of me and the aspect of myself that is living in my wounded state. And we all have that. And also for me, in terms of that kind of pattern of working with mentors that didn't always work out, was also this acknowledgement of, I don't want to work with people that are also leading through that wounded woman, or they're triggering that. So it was really helpful in terms of like, oh, okay, this is what that is. And so I sat with, what is the definition of the wounded woman archetype? And for me, when I'm in my wounded woman, I'm playing the victim. I'm afraid. I'm doubting myself. The wounded woman, she's looking for somebody else to save her. She operates through the past, what past experiences are. And she feels really like it's just a kind of this really fear-based, narrow focus that exists through where we've got banged around in the past. And again, this place of like where we don't know our own power or our own intuition or anything like that. I also recognized in others, if somebody is triggering or leading through that fear-based place, they are also in their wounded woman archetype. And that was a real big empowerment piece of, I don't want to work with anybody that is triggering or colluding with the wounded woman. So all of that, kind of fear-based marketing or, shaming, that to me, I aligned that with sort of the wounded woman archetype. And so I know both in myself, when that aspect is getting triggered, when I'm in my wounded woman, not a great place to make decisions in terms of what support I need or what I want to create, because I'm kind of in that very kind of limited conscious state. When I'm seeking mentorship or support, I want to be working with mentors, women, or people that are activating my empowered self, and they're leading through that place of empowerment, not fear. So I got the lesson, basically I got the learning. Now, where it becomes a really valuable teaching is I can now identify what that feels like when I'm in that state, and I don't want to create through that. I don't want to lead through that space. A lot of the things that I teach in some of my programs when it comes to, content creation and creating your offerings and, looking at money, it's like we don't want to be creating from the place of our wounded self, because when we're creating from a place of our wounded self, we're not creating from full potential or from wisdom, and we're not activating it in others. So if we can identify that we have this part of us and know how to move with it and create around it, then we're not bringing that energy into everything that we create. And, here's the thing, as human beings, we're always going to have a wounded part of ourselves. Like, I think that's just part of being human. And so one of the things in the practices that I've come around this teaching is I identify who my wounded woman is, the aspect of myself. And I think what's powerful about using the archetypes is it gets us away from self-identifying with it, right? So instead of saying I'm wounded, it's kind of saying I have an aspect of myself that is wounded. So we're not fully identifying with it, because when we fully identify with our wounded self, again, we're sort of cutting ourselves off from, the empowered, sort of authentic and very wise parts of us. So it's sort of like it's an aspect of myself that's almost like separate from me. And what is powerful about that is that I'm not identifying with it. I know what triggers her. I know what happens when I'm in that space and how I feel. There's vulnerability, there's shame, there's guilt, there's fear, there's panic, there's terror. And the other part of working with this part of me, because it's not I want to deflect or deny or reject or make it bad, but I want to sort of have compassion and empathy for the part of me that has wounding. So when I'm in this space, part of what I do, it's almost like if I could communicate with this aspect of myself and ask it, what do you need? What are you feeling right now? It allows me to communicate with it and also tap into the part of me that's not there, so I can kind of self-nurture, if that makes sense. My wounded woman will show up in places where I feel vulnerable, which is a lot, I think putting ourselves out there, creating our medicine, all of those things that feel, risk, or we're really going for our dreams, it triggers an element of vulnerability that I know is going to stir up my wounded woman, because she wants to be protected and she wants to be safe and she wants to be supported. And so I give space and room for her voice to be witnessed, but I don't have her be in the driver's seat leading and creating. So when I'm in this space, part of my ritual with her is, having a journal, tapping into the part of me and just letting her, what do you need? What's happening for you right now? What are you afraid of? And then on the other side of the wounded woman archetype, I created an archetype, and I call it kind of like my wise woman. You can use the awakened woman or my authentic self or my higher self. And sort of the same type of philosophy. It's like on the contrast of the wounded woman, who is this other part of me? And what does she embody, and what's her wisdom to this part of me that is wounded? And how do I bring more of her energy into myself as I'm navigating these places that I feel vulnerable, because so that I'm not unconsciously manifesting or creating through my wounded woman. So it's sort of this like a dialogue that happens, and a part where I can spend time with these different aspects of myself. But I think what was really powerful about this teaching around the wounded woman is it gave me something to land in, to recognize when I was in my fear and my wounding, so that I don't run into the same situations and creations in my work and in my life, because now I know what triggers that. So, you know, I'm not hiring mentors that are toxic for me, basically. When I'm creating my containers or I'm pricing my offerings, I'm intentionally tapping into another part of me that's not wounded. And so I'm not creating through dilution, and I'm not undercharging myself, and I'm not you know, sitting in this place of fear that I don't have anything to share or to speak to people. So that type of, if you want to call it, I don't like using positive or negative, but that's a judgment. But let's say that fear-based place is the wounded woman. And I think a lot of the times, or one of the things that I see in my work with people and with the women I work with, is they're unconsciously creating through their wounded woman archetype without even knowing it. And so when we kind of bring awareness to this teaching, it's massive and it's very illuminating. And what happens is they can catch themselves. So it's like, oh my God, I'm not undercharging myself, and I'm not creating from this place of fear or accommodating other people. That's another thing of the wounded woman. She's very accommodating for other people or for clients at the sacrifice to herself. And that's not going to get us to the place that we want to be. And so it's very a kind of a transformative and powerful teaching when we can sort of connect to this archetype and understand it, so it's not unconsciously leading ourselves. And this is a little bit kind of connected to, I think, the very first episode in the series where I talked about, you know, authentic self and the false self. It's another version of this. So what do you do with this all? So I wanted to also, as part of this video, share a blog post that I wrote about the wounded woman archetype and kind of where it emerged. And then my invitation to you through this teaching is to maybe sit with your own version of, what is my wounded woman archetype? How does she feel like? Where does she manifest? How does she show up? And where have I maybe unconsciously allowed her to lead? And then what is my alternative to that, kind of the wise woman archetype, or my higher self, or whatever you want to call it, and what wisdom does she have? And also, how can I love up on my wounded woman? Because again, it's not a place for us to feel ashamed of or to get rid of. It's just to have compassion and empathy for the part of us that feels vulnerable in life sometimes and is sensitive and does have hurt and wounds. And that's okay to have. We just want to have it be in a space where it's not dictating what we create and how we show up. So that's today's episode. Let me know how that resonates with you. And if you want to kind of deepen more into that teaching, you're welcome to read the blog post around the wounded woman archetype. And then for those of you that are new to my community, if you kind of love and resonate with some of the things that I talk about, you can follow me on Facebook, Hillary Schneider. I also have a Facebook group called Epona Rising Women's Circle. And you can also find me on Women Who Run with Horses and Instagram at Hillary Epona. All of those links are also under the video. And that's it for today. So hopefully that was helpful for you, and let me know. I always love hearing, you know, comments from you guys, and hopefully we'll see you in the next episode.